the Gerontological Society of America, Advancing Innovation in Aging. Welcome to GSA on Aging. I'm Howard Degenholtz, social media editor of The Gerontologist, a bi-monthly publication of the Gerontological Society of America. Professor Ann Dickerson is an occupational therapist. She's a researcher and a practitioner at East Carolina University, and her area of research and expertise is transportation and aging. I spoke to her about her recent paper in The Gerontologist.
Hi, Howard.
Hi, Ann. How are you?
I'm good.
Thanks for taking the time to talk to me. Let's jump right in. What is a driving evaluation?
It's a really excellent question because there's many different ideas of what a driving evaluation is. So you go to the DMV as a 16-year-old and you get a driving evaluation, and you get your vision test, you take a knowledge test, and then you go for a ride for about 10 minutes. And so the DMV is testing whether you know your road rules and can handle the car. But when I talk about a driving evaluation, I'm really talking about a comprehensive driving evaluation where there's a question about their driving fitness. And so I, as an occupational therapist and driving rehabilitation specialist, I check their vision, I do cognitive assessments, I do physical assessments, see how their mobility, their strength, their reaction time, and for cognition, the processing time. How can they see things in the environment and process it fast enough so they can physically make a decision and respond to it? So you do clinical assessments, and then you go on behind the wheel. So the clinical assessment informs you about what issues you might need to be aware of, and so that you're watching and making sure that you do a full driving evaluation, which takes at least 45 minutes to an hour to take them on the road, and starting in the quiet neighborhood and then, getting in more and more traffic.
Do you think that if you assessed an adult who is not referred to you on suspicion, would they pass?
You mean somebody that's cognitively intact?
Yeah.
And, I've done studies with, everyday individuals in the community, and yes, of course, they would pass. Because this is not about being a perfect driver.
Okay.
It's about being because the reality of it is we all make mistakes. Most people have been in a crash at some point in their life. And crashes are typically human mistakes. And for although a severe crash is pretty rare, most people have the little thumper bumper, in the parking lot or something like that. And it's just a loss of attention, not seeing they're in their blind spot, and hopefully you learn from those mistakes.
And what is the most important thing we can do to improve transportation for older adults?
Oh, the most important thing, I'm not sure that there is just one thing, because it's such a complex issue. And each community has different issues. So in, say, a larger city that has some public transportation, their issue is about making sure their public transportation is accessible for older adults. For example, some simple things is at bus stops putting a bench so that an older person that doesn't have the stamina can sit down. Or, if you're in the South, you need a cover so that they're not sitting or standing in the sun. But in the smaller communities where there is limited public transportation, it's a totally different issue. There is so much planning that needs to be done, and the reality in our country is we can't make everything perfect because it's so expensive. So it really does fall onto families and our older adults. And my push right now is making a transportation plan. So just as you do retirement planning, just as people think about where they want to retire to and live out, are they going to move to a retirement community? Are they going to move from the harsh winters to the south where they don't have to deal with that because of all of the mobility issues? They need to think about what are they going to do in terms of long-term transportation planning, because everyone's living longer, and that's really good news. And we all want to drive forever, but the reality is the research shows that older adults will outlive their driving ability by 6 to 10 years. So it's important to make those plans, that transportation plan for the 6 to 10 years. I was just evaluating, and I was speaking with a woman, and she's relatively young. She's 71, and she was in a car crash a year ago. It wasn't her fault, but recovering from that car crash was really difficult, and so now she wanted to get back to driving, but it impacted her physical ability. Cognitively, she was fine. But we went out on the drive with her, and what I spoke to her about was the fact that there's no problem with her thinking ability, but what she wasn't fast enough physically. And then as everybody slows down when they're older, and so she was slowing down to compensate for that, but then she was driving 10 to 20 miles slower than everybody else, and then that becomes
that's dangerous.
A problem.
Yeah.
And what we discussed was about making a transportation plan, and she wanted to buy a new car, and we talked about, well, what about using it? At some point she's going to need to retire. What about making that transition now? And we talked about Uber, taxi. Oh, that's so expensive. But I told her, and I said, well, how much does it cost for a car? Well, it costs, $50 a month for gas, $40 for insurance.
Right.
And I said, well, let's just assume all the places you want to go were covered by a taxi or Uber. It might even be $100 a month. And she said, yeah, that's a lot. I said, yes, but you're planning to spend $28,000 on a vehicle.
Right.
So you just, it's making the math and doing the math, and there's so many more options available. So another thing we as a society and communities can do is make sure some of these alternative options are available. There's volunteer driving programs, but they are getting bogged down in some of the legalities and insurance. And so I think at a policy level, that's what I think looking at the policies for volunteer programs, for alternative transportation is really what we need to do, if I had to pick one thing.
So I want to dig into...
that's a long answer to the question.
I want to dig into the Uber, Lyft, ride-sharing economy and really ask you what you think are the pros and cons of it. In the example you gave, it seems like a good solution for that woman. But I wonder if what you're thinking is around people who are further along in terms of their mobility or cognition.
Sure. And that's a very good question, because I think for this individual who has a smartphone, knows how to use it, get on Amazon. That's what I'm saying. She was computer literate, so it was really a good potential and to go. But individuals that have some cognitive impairment, that's not the option they should be using. They really do need to depend on friends and family, and some of these volunteer driving programs are designed to do the door through door. So the meaning they'll pick them up at the door, they'll take them to the vehicle, and take them to their appointment or where they need to go. Certainly, most communities that have public transportation, there is. You can call and they have a service where the public transportation can provide that service.
Right.
So, it depends on your community. But I do want to mention GoGo Grandparent is an excellent service for individuals that are not computer savvy, but really still can get to the place they need, the grocery store and back. And Go-Go Grandparent is basically a concierge service where they call a phone number and they do the logistics of getting a vehicle there. But it's a service for the call for the person. They can call on the phone rather than try to use a smartphone.
Right.
And then it's automatically transferred out of their bank account with the concierge service on that. So that's an excellent service for that transition time.
I assume that's more expensive.
And the reality of it is someone with a cognitive impairment, with the beginning dementia, really learning to use some of those services is not an option. And so it really is a burden on families and friends. And but that's why making that transportation plan early when they first have the diagnosis, the transportation planning needs to happen at that point. Unfortunately, what happens many times is families or families don't want to make the decision. They don't want to take that independence away from their father, their mother, and so they delay. Mom or dad is in an accident, and then it becomes a crisis. And that accident doesn't have to be a horrible accident, but just enough to have that person very upset, very confused, and then it becomes an overnight issue rather than a transitional process. What we're doing in our program right now is really putting in North Carolina. It's a state, fortunately, that can have a restricted license, so they can still drive within 5 miles of their familiar home, which is helpful. So that's a nice transition plan. Is that self-regulation, and that's what is talked about in this article, that people do. Most older adults are safe drivers, and they self-regulate by not driving at night, not driving in bad weather, avoiding highway traffic. And so for the most part, the majority of our older adults do self-regulate. Unfortunately, for those that are very dependent on the car, they live in those rural communities, it becomes much more of an issue. And then for our individuals that have the cognitive impairment, they don't have the insight to self-regulate. That's when they need to have that comprehensive driving evaluation.
I want to ask you about Uber and Lyft again, because you mentioned
yes, I'm sorry.
The door-through-door, which Uber and Lyft don't do that. That's not part of what you're paying for.
They do not do door-to-door.
I'm wondering if older adults think that they might be able to get a door-to-door assistance from an Uber driver.
I think that the need will help with that. I know in the town I live, there are several other transportation services that actually do door-to-door. And so and Uber and Lyft right now, they are really designed for those individuals that can use a smartphone and come out. It's really going to be the specialized services that will do that door-through-door and help with the groceries. And I think Go-Go Grandparent is one of them that goes a little bit further. They may get out and help the door, and they may do door-through-door, and it depends. Sometimes it depends on the driver. I know with some Uber drivers, they get my luggage in the trunk, and others will pop the trunk. So it's also on an individual basis. But so any of those ride sharing, we'll see more ride sharing, I think, for individuals that need more assistance.
So you think the market
and they'll be called something else.
Do you think the market will adjust?
I think the market will drive some of those. But I do think that, we need to do research. I mean, I think that's one of the things that the Transportation Aging Interest Group does is really, and we really need research to show that these services are needed. And the main, we can talk about the services being expensive, but compared to if people had transportation to get to where they need and want to go, it's going to be a lot cheaper than having them in assisted living or long-term care facilities. because if they can't get to the doctor, they can't get to their medication, they can't get to the grocery store, that's what happens. They'll not get the services they need, and they will need to be, in the hospital, in the long-term care services, and certainly that's an astronomical cost. So it's really much cheaper to invest in transportation and mobility services and all the other services we need. And we absolutely know that we don't have enough long-term care facilities for all the people that are aging, which is why the emphasis on aging in place.
Now, do you think we have enough transportation providers currently to meet the need that's out there?
No, I don't think we do. But it'll take a greater grow in both public and private. We really need to address some of these issues at a policy level. I was a delegate to the White House Conference on Aging back in 2005, and transportation was like a number 3 issue for the older adults there. Now, there was a White House Conference in 2010. Transportation was integrated, but it wasn't highlighted. And one of the things that I really think that people don't understand about older adults, and that it's just not about providing transportation. It's understanding what the car means for older adults. And when I was thinking about talking with you, I was thinking, I really believe for us, and I'm a baby boomer, for me, my car when I was growing up was my social networking vehicle. So we didn't use our phones, and we didn't have computers. So driving at 16, getting that license, and going out to the drive-in movie, going down to the football game, our vehicle was our way. I call it our social networking. And when I think about when I would talk to my students and said, which would you give up, your phone or your car? And overwhelmingly, they'd say, oh, I'd never give up my phone. That's how they connect to the world.
Right.
You ask a group of baby boomers, and they'll say, I'll give up the phone any day. Give me my car. So the car has much more meaning to older adults than just getting to where they want to go. And I think there's many people, children and grandchildren, that say, I'll drive you there. And it really is about the car. It's really that sign of independence. So we need to understand that driving is also what's important to them.
Do you think
it's their way of they connected with other people? And I think it's really important to that's a grieving process.
So, Anne,
so it's not just. Go ahead.
So, Anne, I'm sorry to cut you off because I think you're getting into something interesting, but I want to ask you, as a baby boomer, thinking about these issues, do you think that the rideshare services, the way they're constructed, the way you can order it up on demand, tell them where you want to go, it's all on your phone. You don't even have to talk to a person if you don't want to. Do you think that is a substitute for that feeling of independence? Do you think that it transfers to those ride-sharing services in ways that riding the bus doesn't?
And that's why you have to understand it. It will get them to where they need and want to go, but it still doesn't substitute, and that's where it's understanding the complexity of the issue.
Interesting. So you don't think that it's an easy transition to using a service?
Absolutely. No. I mean, I think people can learn that service, and the sooner they can learn it, the better. And that's why I talked about that transportation plan. So if you can, let's say you're an older adult, you live in, and you can still drive, and there's no problem, but you're now can't. You have some vision, there's glare, so you don't want to drive at night. And so people don't go out at night. And that's a great time to try an Uber, try some ride sharing, so that you can see, and there's not a problem about using it. And it's like, wow, this is pretty good. Now I can go out at night.
That's exactly what I'm thinking.
Thing. And so that's helping that transition and understanding. But there's always going to be, the older baby boomer, the guy that loved his sports car, and you see them at the shows, the vintage cars. I mean, because sometimes it's more just about the car.
Right.
So
right, because the
it's
car
understanding that,
yeah.
That maybe they can still have the car, but
right.
they still need to get help when they need to go into town. And
what got you interested in this line of research?
And as an occupational therapist, I was teaching OT, and I needed to get a doctorate, and I got a doctorate in developmental psychology with aging and older adults. So my research area was older adults, and as an occupational therapist, it was the functional performance. And the difference, there is a difference because of aging between young and old adults. And I heard a presentation on driving, and it was, and I love to drive myself, and it was like there was such a gap. There was OTs weren't addressing driving and mobility, and so it was like a perfect topic for me. And so back in 2003 is when I started knowing that I wanted to do research in this area and work in this area, and it's been a real passion because I think we have come a long way as occupational therapists to really much better at addressing these issues, much better at assessing someone and having the message, framing the message. It's not all about the test. I told you earlier about a driving assessment, but the most of the time I spent with that woman was talking about how she can prepare for the next 20 years effectively. And I think that's where we need to make sure that we have a safety net, that we don't just say, well, you need to stop driving, and here's some phone numbers of Uber and Lyft and whatever. I think the message needs to be, hey, as you're getting older, let's start planning. Let's start planning your bathroom. That you need maybe you want to get one of those showers with a seat in it. And
right.
People change their homes as they age, and they need to think about their transportation plan.
I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me about this. It was really interesting and really valuable.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity to just get the message out there.
Hey, I wanted to call and talk to you about another paper that I read. Do you have a couple minutes to talk?
Oh, sure.
Okay, great. So, you know how we were talking about your wanting to get a new car?
Right.
So, I've got a question for you. What would you do if you couldn't drive anymore? How would you get around?
Oh, wow, I don't know. I would have to depend upon other people, including and mostly your father, who's never around. During the day he's usually busy, and I would have to call Uber.
You'd use an Uber?
I would, yeah, probably, or Lyft. One of them. I would have to go with a car service for anything that was out of the immediate area.
Okay, so over the past, I don't know, year or so, have you modified your driving habits? Have you changed the way you drive or where you drive?
The only modification has been because of my walking. Because if I can drive. I have complete control of the car, and I'm not forgetting things or anything. But a lot of my life has been modified because of a very bad back. But I can drive and I can get to places.
So, do you see a time when you might not be able to drive?
To be honest with you, I'm closing my eyes to it. I don't want to. I really can't even accept that as being a part of my life, because I've always been very independent. And a good part of it has been being able to get into the car and go wherever I want to go, which I can still do. But when I get to the other end, whether it's here at the house or wherever I'm going, I may need help walking. But once I get where I'm going, I'm okay.
What about any of your friends?
What about them?
Have any of them stopped driving?
No. Nobody has stopped driving.
Interesting.
We're in a very car-oriented society, unfortunately. It's not easy to get from place to place without a car.
Right. Do people talk about it?
No, not really, because we're all pretty mobile. Even though most of my friends are in their late 70s and early 80s, we're not talking spring chickens here. But people have to take care of themselves. Once you're thrown into the middle of it and you can't drive at all, it pretty much, I wouldn't call it a death sentence, but it pretty much keeps you close to home and in the good graces of your friends and family.
I'm thinking back to when Uncle Alan was still driving, but there were a lot of people who thought that he shouldn't have the keys anymore because he was denting up the car all the time.
He wasn't processing information, and he was getting lost, and he was making mistakes in his driving. His visual perception was going also.
What was that like? Were you involved with Aunt Margie and dealing with that?
Unfortunately, Aunt Margie did not fully tell us what was going on. I think this, for almost a year, Daddy and I suspected something was happening, but we weren't sure. She wasn't saying anything, and he wasn't saying anything. Excuse me. And one night we went out for dinner. We went to a restaurant that was between our house and Uncle Alan's house. And she had come in from the city from work, and he had been home, and we were waiting for him to come to join us for dinner. Now, it was a straight run from their house to the restaurant, and it shouldn't have taken more than 5 minutes. But we were there for maybe 40 minutes until he came in, and he looked a little confused and perplexed. He said he had not gotten lost, but he really was not. He hadn't taken the right street or something. He made an excuse for what had happened, and she never said a word. And it wasn't until almost 6 or 8 months later that they basically let us in on what was happening.
Right. Have you ever used an Uber or a Lyft?
No.
Never?
No.
Have any of your friends?
Yeah, and family.
What do you think about it?
As an idea or as a reality?
It is a reality. What do you mean?
Well, no, I know, but
as a service, do you think it's safe? Do you think it's useful? Do you think it's too expensive? What do you think?
From what I've heard from people who have used it, most people are very satisfied. The price is right. The drivers are usually very polite. The cars are clean. A lot of our friends take Uber to the airport, or short trips or whatever, and it always seems to work out. And I've read stuff in the newspapers about surly drivers and things that happen with drivers in both Uber and Lyft. And I think you take the same chance with a regular licensed cab.
So the word of mouth is positive, and from what you've heard.
Yeah, the word of mouth is positive.
What about somebody, an older person who really has some mobility difficulties, like they have a cane or a walker or something, do you think Uber is appropriate for them?
The only thing I would question is when they get to the end of the trip, is if someone is alone and needs help, will they help them? To the door of a medical building, for instance. Someplace where they could get assistance from inside.
Well, do you think it's their job?
No, I don't think that's part of the job description. But sometimes people are very kind and they will help.
Do you think that it's reasonable to expect that or ask that of a driver?
I think it's reasonable to ask it. I would hope that most people driving, one of these private services would have enough, I don't want to say that, maybe compassion or just goodness within them to help somebody who obviously needs to be helped, not even out of the car, but from the car to the door of the building. I think it can be worked out.
I think that's very optimistic.
Well, I prefer to be optimistic than not.
Okay, listen, I'm going to...
Either that or I have to call you.
Well, okay, I'll be there in 6 hours to help you out of the car.
Right. That's the old... who's the science fiction writer? Kurt Vonnegut, I think, who wrote a book, and he was doing a screenplay, and he lived here in the New York area, and he had to go back and forth to California to work on the book, on the script, and he told the people in California that he didn't fly. So they said, "Well, what do we do if we need you?" He says, "You call me, get on the train, and I come to California. And 4 days later, I'm there." So
Right.
yeah. And look, people can do anything they have to do. If it takes a lot of money, many people would be stopped in their tracks. If it takes a minimal amount of money and kindness from the people that you're dealing with, I think anything can be done.
I'm going to let you go. You have a nice day. I'll talk to you later.
Okay, thanks.
Love you.
You too. Love you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. To learn more about The Gerontologist and to read its latest articles, visit the journal website at geron.org. The Gerontological Society of America was founded in 1945 to promote the scientific study of aging, to encourage exchanges among researchers and practitioners from various disciplines related to gerontology, and to foster the use of gerontological research in informing public policy.